Welcome to the Pharmacy Inspection Podcast, brought to you by Visant Consulting, where we discuss topics related to all things pharmacy compliance. Now, please welcome your host, board-certified compounding pharmacist, Seth DePasquale.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Pharmacy Inspection Podcast, brought to you by Visant Consulting. So, for those of you that have seen my article about the revisions of 797, first of all, I want to say thanks for everyone that's read it. It's gotten a lot of attention, and I really appreciate those who are following along and hopefully are taking some notes from that and actually maybe perhaps even preparing comments to submit to the USP compounding committee. This is your chance. This is not in final form. It's still in draft revision format. So you're still able to make comments and ask questions and present any material that you think is contradictory or whatever. If you have a disagreement with what is written in the chapter in the revision, so but for those of you who don't like to read, I'd like to bring you an audio version of this, and perhaps in the coming weeks. We'll be doing a webinar as well for probably more like a town hall discussion type format. But let's get right into it. So first of all, I start out with the compounding categories. 797 splits compounded sterile preparations into three different categories. Category 1, CSPs have the least number of requirements imposed on them, meaning they're expected to be at least compounded under controlled environmental conditions in a segregated compounding area or a clean room. But with that, you're also going to get the least beyond use dates as well. So under controlled room temperature, you're going to get less than 12 hours. And under refrigerated temperatures, you're going to get less than 24 hours. In category 2, it splits it up into a whole bunch of different ways, and this is all done very nicely in a nice, neat little table format. You can tell right off the bat that we're looking at a few different things here. Whether or not the compounded sterile preparation has passed sterility testing, how exactly it was prepared, and how it's going to be stored. Now, aseptically processed CSPs that have not undergone sterility testing and have been prepared from one or more non-sterile starting components, at controlled room temperatures, you're going to get 1 day, refrigerated temperatures, you're going to get 4 days, and in the frozen state, you're going to get 45 days. Now, if you're preparing from all sterile ingredients, room temperature gets 4 days, refrigerator gets 10 days, and frozen gets 45 days. Now, let's take this a step further. If sterility testing was performed and passed on aseptically processed CSPs, now remember, aseptically processed CSPs, that means that they're processed just in a regular clean room environment, and they're not undergoing any kind of terminal sterilization. That is a sterilization process with the drug or compounded sterile preparation in its final container undergoing a sterilization process. So at controlled room temperature, if you have passed sterility testing, you're going to get 30 days. In refrigerator, you're going to get 45 days. In frozen, you're going to get 60 days. Now let's hop over to terminally sterilized. If it's not been sterility tested, you're going to get 14 days at controlled room temperature, 28 days at refrigerated temperature, and 45 days at frozen temperatures. Now, if you have undergone sterility testing, you're going to get 45 days at controlled room temperature, 60 days at refrigerated temperatures. Again, this really speaks to sort of some of the scientific background of what actually sets beyond use dates. Whether or not we have a sterility assurance, that is, whether or not we're doing sterility testing, the compounding method, whether it's aseptically processed, just in a clean room, or whether it's been aseptically processed then terminally sterilized via autoclave, irradiation, whatever, and its storage conditions. Now, all these come into play when we're talking about beyond use dates and the stability of a compound. They detail this in their background papers that kind of give the information and rationale for what they've written in the revision. Now, let's move on to Category 3 CSPs. Category 3 CSPs, whether they've been aseptically processed, sterility tested, and passing all applicable tests for Category 3, at controlled room temperatures, you get 60 days. At refrigerated room temperature or at refrigerated temperatures, you get 90 days, and frozen, you get 180 days. Now, terminally sterilized with sterility testing and passing all applicable tests for Category 3 CSPs, you get 90 days at controlled room temperatures, 120 days at refrigerated temperatures, and 180 days frozen. So, but there's a lot of caveats to what comes along with the beyond use date limits for Category 3 CSPs. There's quite a bit more things that you need to do, including facility and personnel requirements. Personnel must first pass garbing, hand hygiene, and media fill, and must do that every 3 months with with environmental surface monitoring. Garb must be sterile. Garb may not be reused. Environmental monitoring, viable air needs to be done at least monthly. Viable surface needs to be done at least weekly. And after compounding procedures, you also need to do viable surface sampling. And cleaning requirements, sporicidal use increases to weekly for Category 3 CSPs. In addition to that, you have stability requirements that you have to use a stability indicating method. The CSP must be prepared according to exact formulation from which the stability data is derived. The CSP must use the same packaging and container closure as used in the study. And this relates back to the packaging and container closure study. Stability study documentation must be available, including description of methodology, i.e. the number of samples taken, storage conditions, validation of the method, stability indicating analytical method, and all the results of the study. And then on top of that, you also have to have release testing for Category 3 CSPs. And all those must be done according to USP 71. Or equivalent or better than USP 71 testing. Moving on to personnel training and competency, there's been a lot more competencies and core skills that have been added to 797 that basically you have to demonstrate these not only through written testing, but also through observational competencies. And the core skills that they list are hand hygiene, garbing, cleaning and disinfection, calculations, measuring and mixing, aseptic technique, achieving and or maintaining sterility and apyrogenicity, use of equipment, documentation of the compounding process, e.g. the formulation, master formulation, and compounding records, principles of high efficiency particulate air or HEPA filtered unidirectional airflow within the ISO class 5 area, and proper use of primary engineering controls, including principles of movement of materials and personnel within the compounding area. So there's a lot to be expected of somebody that is going to be performing any kind of compounding, any kind of sterile compounding. Let's talk just a little bit further about personnel training and competency, because there's something very specific that's written in the revision that talks about aseptic manipulation competency. So the observational competency that you actually, as a compounder, has to perform in order to maintain proficiency and to be able to continue compounding for sterile preparations. So for category 1 and 2 CSPs, this evaluation will be done initially and then every 6 months thereafter. For category 3 CSPs, operators must complete initially and then every 3 months thereafter. Now, this aseptic manipulation competency is really what we're talking about is glove fingertip sampling and media fill. And in addition to doing garbing, hand sanitization, or I should say hand sanitization, garbing, and media fill, is that you also have to sample the area around your compounding area. Up next, the garbing requirements. There's been some changes to the garbing requirements for category 1 and 2 CSPs. They must be low lint garment with sleeves that fit snugly around wrists and enclosed neck. Low lint shoe covers, low lint cover for head that covers the hair, ears, and if applicable, cover for facial hair. A low lint face mask and sterile powder-free gloves. And for category 3 CSPs, all garb must be low lint and sterile, single use if disposable, and cover 100% of the skin. So that's a major change from what we've seen previously in 797 with this category 3 CSP. Again, when we're talking about category 3 CSPs, we're talking about getting the longest amount of beyond use date that you can, up to 180 days. There's going to be a lot of different restrictions or controls put in place so that you can further ensure the sterility of the compound. And that's what it all comes down to, is sterility assurance. So the next thing is facility design and environmental controls. In the revision of the USP 797, there's a lot of mention of a designated person. And a designated person just means that there's going to be a person or persons responsible for ensuring that each area related to CSP preparation meets the classified air quality standard appropriate for the activities to be conducted in that area. The designated persons must also ensure the ISO Class 5 area are located, operated, maintained, monitored, and certified to have appropriate air quality. So having a designated person or a team of people that are responsible for quality aspects of the pharmacy's operations. So having a designated person or a team is not necessarily a new concept. In fact, it's standard operation to have a quality assurance team for pharmaceutical manufacturing, keeping track of quality controls and maintaining an operation to ensure that you have a product that is maintaining all of its required specifications and ensuring that your compounds are quality, safe, have the right ingredient, are maintaining the correct potency and the correct purity. of what they're supposed to, so that they're within specification within those 5 parameters. So again, nothing necessarily new when it comes to, generally speaking, pharmaceutical uh, manufacturing operations, but definitely an introduction, a new introduction into 797 and what's expected of compounders. A couple more things I'm going to talk about just real quick. Let's go over environmental monitoring. So the revision for environmental monitoring has requirements for category 1, 2, and 3, and separates it out by total particle counts, air viable sampling, and surface sampling. For category 1 and 2 CSPs, total particle counts and viable air sampling must be done at least every 6 months, and surface sampling must be done at least monthly. Now, for category 3 CSPs, total particle counts must be done under dynamic conditions at least every 6 months. That's not a change necessarily from category 1 or 2, but at least 30 days prior to commencement of compounding and at least monthly for viable air sampling. And then for surface sampling, at least weekly and within the PEC at the end of every batch before cleaning and disinfection occurs. So that is that's another major change that we are experiencing with environmental monitoring requirements within 797. I'm not going to get into all the different media types and all that stuff. I detailed that a little bit in my summary, but let's move on to cleaning and disinfection. With cleaning and disinfection, the main thing that you have to take away is that there's a difference between cleaning, disinfecting, and now applying sporicidal. So depending on what area we're talking about, and this is a pretty big table that I'm not going to actually detail verbally, but the main takeaway here is that you have to have a cleaning process, a disinfecting process, and a process for applying a sporicidal, and they're done at different intervals depending on what area of the clean room or piece of equipment we're talking about. Now, if it's a critical area like our PEC, then obviously that's going to be done a lot more frequently. So if we're talking about our floors, walls, ceilings, storage bins, stuff like that, that's not as critical, and it is not going to be required to be done as often. In fact, all those things, cleaning, disinfecting, and applying a sporicidal to the floor, walls, ceiling, storage bins, and equipment outside of the PEC, that all can be done monthly, at least monthly. One major change that I should make note of is in sterility testing, and that is a very specific change to the number of units that you're able to make and send off for sterility testing. Now, 797, the revision states that the maximum batch size for all CSPs requiring sterility testing must be limited to 250 final yield units. That means that you can only make a total of 250 units of any one CSP and send that off for sterility testing for it to be a valid sterility test. Now, this is a departure from what it says in USP 71, because the standard USP 71 standard gives the appropriate number of units to send for batches greater than 500 units. So what this change does is put a limit on the number of units in any one batch to be compounded, like I said. while the rationale is scientifically sound and logical, it's a departure from the table in USP 71, which allows for batches of over 500 units. And this is one thing that I would probably raise my hand about and say, hey, wait a second. We have one standard that's saying one thing, but then we have another standard that's somewhat contradicting that standard, or at least putting a stricter standard in place. Um, and maybe a compromise might be for from USP 71 for batches over 500 but less than 1,000. You have to send off so many units, and so yeah, that's something that I think warrants a second look from compounders, and should perhaps be commented on, um, because I have a feeling that there's going to be a lot of compounders out there that are compounding a lot more than 250 final yield units in their batch, and this just is going to be honestly cost prohibitive, because testing, of course, costs money. Doing more batches costs more money. The last thing I'm going to cover here is QA/QC and documentation. Now, quality assurance and quality control are typically towards the end of the chapter, and this is no different in this revision as well. They have put it at sort of at the end of the chapter. In my opinion, it's one of the more important things that we should really be paying attention to in terms of just compounding in general, especially if we're talking about sterile compounding. Uh, but it does say that um, a facility's QA and QC programs must be formally established and documented in SOPs that ensure all aspects of the preparation of CSPs are conducted in accordance with the requirements in this chapter and laws and regulations of the applicable regulatory jurisdiction. A designated person must ensure that the facility has formal written QA and QC programs that establish a system of adherence to procedures, prevention and detection of errors and other quality problems, evaluation of complaints and adverse events, and appropriate investigations and corrective actions. And the most important thing to understand, in my opinion, here is the corrective actions portion of this. And if you have quality controls in place that you're detecting whether or not a quality control is going in or out of specification for a particular piece of equipment, for your compound in general, you should be able to detect that and then have a corrective and preventative action put in place by doing an investigation and figuring out the root cause by analyzing the situation and figuring out how to prevent that from happening in the future. So again, this is sort of what separates the big boys from the little boys here, is having a good quality control, quality assurance, and CAPA system in place to detect errors or when things are falling out of specification, so that you can correct them hopefully before they get to the patient. Lastly, documentation. There's not only more documentation that's expected from the revision. The chapter states that documentation must include, but is not limited to, the following: personnel training, competency assessments, and qualification records, including corrective actions for any failures; certification reports, including corrective actions for any failures; environmental air and surface monitoring procedures and results; equipment records, including calibration, verification, and maintenance reports; receipt of components, which might be certificates of analysis; SOPs, master formulation records, and compounding records, release inspection and testing records, information related to complaints and adverse events, including corrective actions taken, and results of investigations and corrective actions. And again, as I previously stated, that the corrective actions and preventative actions are a really big portion of this. And it's truly what separates potentially a good compounder from a compounder that's maybe trying but not quite there in terms of quality assurance yet. So it really does make a very big difference in the maturity of your compounding operation. And so while I've detailed a lot of the changes in the revision, this isn't all. This is not inclusive of every single of every single change in the revision. So I encourage anyone that is following along to also go on and read the revision for themselves, and of course, make any comments and questions to the USP Compounding Committee if you see fit to. So let me ask you this. Let me just conclude with a question. Do you think that all these changes make for a safer compounding environment that limits the risk to patients? I don't know. That's for you to answer. And I have my own opinion about that. I've written that in the article if you've read it. And I think that you should ponder that question when you're thinking about some of the changes in the revision and whether or not they actually are going to affect the end final user, that is the patient of our compounded sterile preparations. So there you have it. Thanks again for listening to another episode of the Pharmacy Inspection Podcast. And as always, keep raising the bar.
Thanks for joining us for the Pharmacy Inspection Podcast. If you have a question or compliance-related issue, reach out to us at Visant Consulting. We can help with all kinds of compliance-related issues, from 340B to drug diversion to compounding. Let us be your guide to help you raise the bar in your own pharmacy practice. At Visant, we're all about transforming healthcare through pharmacy. Everyone on our team brings many years of experience, deep expertise, and a steadfast commitment to help you achieve high performance in all aspects of pharmacy. Visit us at visantinc.com to learn more. That's VISANTEINC.com.